Faithfulness is something that's expressed between two parties. Could be a husband and a wife, friends, teammates, a person and a cause. But most importantly, between you and God. And when it comes to faithfulness, we ask the question, will you be loyal regardless of circumstance? Will you be true to your word, your commitments, and your convictions? Are you someone who is steadfast and dedicated no matter the cost? Daniel is a story of faithfulness tested in a new culture through heavy persecution and trials, in the big things and in the small. How do we remain faithful to God? And how does God remain faithful to us? Can you imagine the horror of a foreign nation invading your home, defeating your people, wiping away everything you know, erasing your freedom, taking you captive, away from your family, away from your home, away from everything you know? It's actually not hard to imagine as we watch this story playing out before our eyes in real time in Ukraine. But I'm actually not talking about Ukraine. I'm talking about the nation of Israel, Judah to be specific. Much like the story we see playing out on the news, the Jewish nation faced a similar demise a few thousand years ago, as Nebuchadnezzar led his Babylonian forces into Judah and defeated the Jews, taking control of Jerusalem. In the book of Daniel, chapter 1, we see that not only did he conquer the land, but we learn of 4 young men who were snatched up, taken against their will, to live and grow up in Babylon. You may have heard this story growing up in church, but I'm hoping you'll catch a glimpse of how much depth is here. So much more than is captured in a VeggieTales cartoon. So, let's understand what's happening to Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These guys were about 14 to 16 years old when they were taken to Babylon. Now, Nebuchadnezzar had a very systematic method of reprogramming these young minds to believe like he believed. When he conquered a new land, he would work to root out the people's practices, culture, and beliefs. Why? Because he wanted them to be about his causes, to do his bidding. He planned to change their language, their diet, their education. He was trying to create servants that were loyal to him, like straight out of a Black Widow movie. So let's dig into who they were. Daniel 1 verse 4 tells us they were young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. We also learn in verse 3 that they were from a royal family. So they were good-looking, they were smart, pretty well-to-do. We also know that they came from a faithful Jewish family, not only because they were Jewish nobility, but it's right there in their names. Their parents were intentional about giving them names that would point to their developing identities. This is pretty cool. When you break down each of their names, you have a much deeper understanding of who they were and where they came from. The letters E-L or El in Hebrew meant God. Daniel, and Mishael. Daniel means God is my judge. Mishael means who is what God is. Their faith was embedded in their names from birth. So that's 2 of them. What about Hananiah and Azariah? Well, IAH, or Yah, it was an abbreviation of Yahweh, or the Lord. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious. Azariah means the Lord will help. These weren't just top 10 baby names of the day, but intentionality by their parents in naming who they were and whose they were. So Nebuchadnezzar thought he could just strip them of their identity and their dignity by taking away those names and naming them with a new identity. Check it out. Daniel was renamed Belteshazzar, which means Bel protect his life. No longer should he look to God as his protector, but to a false god instead. Hananiah was renamed Shadrach. Hananiah means the Lord is gracious. Shadrach means command of Aku. Aku was the Babylonian moon god. And Mishael, he was renamed Meshach. Mishael means who is what God is. Meshach means who is what Aku is. Replacing God not only in his name, but in his life. Azariah became Abednego. Azariah, the Lord will help. Abednego, servant of Nebo, the second-ranking god in Babylon. Listen, they had everything going against them. New names, new foods, new customs, new language, being completely indoctrinated into a belief system that didn't align to what they knew was right. It didn't align to what they knew God had for them. So let's recap on what we've learned so far. You've got 4 14 to 16-year-old guys who are going to be educated for the next 3 years, learning math, science, foreign languages, and some other subjects. They were supposed to eat food they thought was gross and just flat out wrong, and they were living in a culture where they felt like they were swimming upstream, trying to hold on to their values in a place that had no tolerance for those values. Sound familiar? Guys, come on. They were high schoolers. I mean, this passage of scripture might be more relevant to you and what you're going through than any other. You could have just described 4 Christian young men walking down the halls of your school, trying to hold on to your values in a place that has no tolerance for those values. So you want to learn how to navigate those waters? How to be faithful when it feels like everything is fighting against you? We should pay attention to what these guys do, don't you think? So verse 8, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. You see, they drew a line. Language, cool. New classes, not a big deal. Eat food on your menu? Nope. I mean, you guys have eaten school lunches. You get it, right? Easy to die on that hill. Okay, so what's really going on here? The food in question would likely have been associated with pagan sacrifice, either directly sacrificed to the Babylonian gods or involved in their worship ceremonies. Plus, God was very specific about what the Jewish people were allowed to eat, and there were things on the menu that just weren't allowed. As inconvenient as it was, they drew a line and said, we aren't doing that. Even though everything about this situation is flowing one way, we're going to go the other. Even though they were living in a compromised culture, they were committed to an uncompromised faith. So we've already identified that these guys were basically high schoolers. So let's just directly relate what they're going through here. Well, first of all, the situation was just awkward, uncomfortable. You guys get this. When everybody else is doing it, it's hard to say that you aren't in. There's peer pressure involved in that. Plus, if there's ever a time for FOMO, this was it. I mean, you're talking about food prepared in the king's kitchen. This isn't low quality dining. This is the finest dining you can imagine. This is having the presidential chef prepare your meal. And at least for a second, they had to have been thinking, who would know? I'm far from home. My parents aren't here. What could it harm? I mean, seriously, can you get more relevant to your day-to-day? But they drew a line. They went against the flow. Guys, every day, you're tempted to go with the flow, to fit in, to do what everyone else is doing. And you know that God is calling you to go against the flow. Pay attention to what these guys choose. But not only their courageous choice, also pay attention to how God responds. God blesses them. God uses the pain of this situation, and because of their faithfulness, He rewards them. As you go into your groups, I want you to really reflect on how relevant this is to your day-to-day. Who has God called you to be? What influences are in your life that are constantly pushing against you? What does it look like for you to go against the flow? And then understand God's response to you when you draw the line. God's faithfulness to your obedience. Are you the kind to just go with the flow? Or are you the one that swims upstream?